The COP29 climate event just finished, and really, it was full of their predictable madness. Right before it began though, the machine tried setting the stage with narratives. The Mockingbird media put out numerous articles declaring that global emissions have hit a record high, and we're basically doomed. Once again, they changed their doomsday clock too. It changes all the time, and has been for decades. We've passed their official prediction date about a dozen times so far. Now it's almost as if they changed their timeline to coincide with political goals. But that couldn't be the case, because these people are honest, virtuous, and would never lie about anything, right? Yeah.
A 75% chance that the entire North Polar ice cap during some of the summer months could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years.
What I'm saying is the planet's on fire.
This is about our constituents and all of our lives. Iowa, Nebraska, broad swaths of the Midwest are drowning right now.
By 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding every single day on the Earth. That's what's boiling the oceans.
What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought.
Creating these atmospheric rivers and the rain bombs and sucking the moisture out of the land and creating the drought.
If we are unprepared for the next advance, the result could be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history.
And causing these waves of climate refugees predicted to reach 1 billion in this century.
Do you feel like what you have been saying all along has been validated?
Well, I certainly wish I had been wrong.
But it's true. We've seen our official demise predicted at 20 years away, 10 years, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, all of which have come and gone. And now the tipping point, as they call it, is 6 years away. Ironically, that would bring us to 2030. Wow, what a coincidence. I've said it before, but when predictions for calamity align with economic goals, well, that should be a hint that something's up. But yeah, this time the experts warn the planet is just 6 years away from breaching the 1.5 degree temperature limit, meaning we'll hit the tipping point and global warming will become irreversible. And I quote, as a result, researchers claim immediate drastic emission cuts are essential. How convenient to get that information right before a climate event, right? An event where they propose policies to address that very thing. Really perfect timing for catastrophic news. Other articles lamented the fact that the EU is going to miss their 2030 climate targets, as outlined in the Paris Climate Accords. Oh no, how very sad. Oddly enough, they were really concerned with how missing those targets would damage the image of leadership. And yeah, it's a shame. Even while facing certain death from climate change, vanity found the time to make an appearance. But my point is simple. It's not a coincidence that these articles perfectly coincide with COP29 taking place. You see, first you induce fear, and then you can pitch the solution. Tried and true tactics. However, they could really use some new strategies, because fear is just not working. But it's all they know, and they just can't let it go. And proof of that resides in the fact that they kicked things off with notorious blowhard Antonio Gutierrez once again. His entire strategy is about pushing fear, every time with this guy.
The sound you hear is the ticking clock. We are in the final countdown to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And time is not on our side.
The sound you are hearing is the ticking clock. We're in the final countdown. Yeah, a little heavy-handed to say the least, but he did not stop there. Antonio here went really hard on the doomer vibe.
The sound you hear is the ticking clock. We are in the final countdown to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And time is not on our side. Exhibit A 2024, with the hottest day on record and the hottest months on record. This is almost certain to be the hottest year on record. And the masterclass in climate destruction. Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes. Biodiversity destroyed in sweltering seas. Workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat, floods tearing through communities and tearing down infrastructure, children going to bed hungry as droughts ravage crops. And all these disasters and more are being supercharged by human-made climate change. And no country is spared. In our global economy, supply chain shocks raise costs everywhere. Decimated harvests push up food prices everywhere. Destroyed homes increase insurance premiums everywhere. And this is a story of avoidable injustice. The rich cause the problem, the poor pay the highest price. The richest billionaires emit more carbon in an hour and a half than the average person does in a lifetime. Now, unless emissions plummet and adaptation soars, every economy will face far greater fury. But there is every reason to hope. Excellencies, at COP28, all you agreed to move away from fossil fuels, to accelerate net zero energy systems, setting milestones to get there, to boost climate adaptation, and to align the next round of economy-wide national climate action plans, or NDCs, with 1.5-degree limit. It's time to deliver.
Dude, he went full apocalypse, a global Pompeii moment. The main thing that strikes me is the fact that you can feel their desperation through the screen. Their lies are getting bigger, bolder, and more ridiculous as their plan slips away. From the supercharged human destruction to the masterclass in climate destruction, all the way to droughts, famine, and children starving. And then, in a funny twist, he stated a true fact, that the richest billionaires, you know, the people who flew into this climate event on their private jets, well, he admitted that they emit more carbon in about an hour than you or I do in our entire lives, saying that the rich create the problem and the poor pay for it. But here's the real ironic part. That's their entire scam. All of their solutions hurt the middle and lower classes, while being indifferent to the elite. Their solutions include taxing you and I into perpetual poverty based on carbon emissions, while creating carbon markets for the rich to use, so they can pay a fee and then continue to live their lavish lifestyle without restrictions, and they have the nerve to talk to us about equity. Yeah, if you can't afford to offset your carbon, then you're basically locked down, a prisoner. Well, it's probably more similar to being on parole. All of your actions are restricted across the board, and you're gonna have the government on your ass 24/7, monitoring everything you do. Sound good? Of course not, because you have not been charged with a crime. You're supposed to be, you know, free. But Antonio did not stop there. No matter what, it always comes down to economics.
Now more than ever, finance promises must be kept, and developed countries must race the clock to double adaptation finance to at least $40 billion a year by 2025. Adaptation investments can transform economies, driving progress across the Sustainable Development Goals. We need countries' new climate action plans to set out adaptation financing needs. And we need every person on Earth to be protected by an alert system by 2027, in line with our early warnings for all initiatives. And we need climate justice.
After guilt-tripping and gaslighting the world, he declared that promises must be kept, and that we have to increase climate finance to $40 billion a year by 2025. Yeah, well, Joe Biden got the memo, and he pledged another $4 billion to the World Bank. But here's the thing, and this is so crazy, I mean, you couldn't make this up. After demanding billions more in climate funding to the World Bank, we got this revelation, and I quote, "World Bank bureaucrats lost track of $24 billion in climate funds. It gets worse though, because of course it does. They also claim that it could be too low. In fact, it could be twice as much, or 10 times more. Yeah, they quote-unquote lost track of billions and billions of dollars. These people are so corrupt and inept, I don't think we have a word to aptly describe it. But, you know, speaking of corrupt and insane people, remember when Joe Biden made John Podesta the climate czar? Well, they forced him to take a break from spirit cooking, and they trotted that dude out to make a speech too.
We face an urgent question. Do we secure sustainable prosperity for our countries, or do we condemn our most vulnerable to unimaginable climate disasters? 2024 will be the hottest year on record. The consequences of a rapidly warming planet are all around us. From the hundreds of people killed by Hurricanes Helene and Milton in the United States, to the millions of children at risk of starvation in southern Africa from the worst drought in decades, to the torrential rain that stranded students in schools and displaced nearly 100,000 people in Colombia. Vulnerable communities do not just need ambition, they need action. That's why President Biden and Vice President Harris have marshaled unprecedented climate resources over the past 4 years. Colleagues, we have a clear choice between a safer, cleaner, fairer future and a dirtier, more dangerous, and more expensive one. We know what to do. Let's get to work. Let's get it done. Thank you.
We know what to do. Yeah, let me guess. Remove human rights, tax everyone into oblivion, and install a new global surveillance network. None of which will fix the damn climate, because just the premise alone is mind-numbingly stupid. All of their perceived solutions do nothing but expand their claim to power, increase the wealth gap, and ensure there's zero mobility between economic classes. It's a stranglehold on your ability to grow. And that's why we see degrowth as the main principle behind their economic plan, right? But it's even more psychotic than that, because it's all dependent on brainwashing the incoming generation to believe in this delusion too. They want the new generation to believe it every step of the way, and the UN has made sure of that via their education imperative. Their propaganda is riddled throughout the entire education system, and it's happening in every country. UNESCO and the World Economic Forum are teaching your kids that they're a plague on the earth, and the only responsible thing to do is obey their decrees. And of course, eat bugs. You know, it's just incredibly evil to perpetuate this anxiety about the future onto kids, actually telling them that their entire world is going to explode in a crescendo of carbon-fueled infernos, unless they give up basic human rights. The fact is, they're fueling a mental health crisis for the sake of their economic agenda, and it makes me sick. Everyone has to think a little deeper about this stuff. I know you all do, but we need to expand awareness a little bit more. The reason I say that is because a lot of people don't know, but it's been repeatedly admitted during congressional testimonies that the effect of this climate plan will be negligible on carbon levels. Everything from higher taxes, a CBDC, digital ID, social credit scores, censorship, mass surveillance, building 15-minute cities. It's not going to affect it, basically at all. And on top of that, it hasn't even been established that carbon is fueling higher temperatures. It could be the reverse, that higher temperatures increase carbon. They have no idea.
Well, I posed the question a couple of times. Can you please show me that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming? Because the whole of the energy policy is based on emissions. And no one has yet shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming. And if they did, they'd also have to show that the natural emissions, and that's 97% of the total, don't drive global warming. Then I look back in time through my geological eyes and look at times in the past when we had very high carbon dioxide contents of the atmosphere, up to hundreds of times higher than now, and we see that we didn't have runaway global warming. Of course we had climate change, it's quite natural, it happens all the time, but what we did have is 6 major ice ages. And there is no correlation over geological time between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and temperature. In fact, it is the past that shows us that carbon dioxide does not drive global warming. The drill cores we have in Antarctic and Arctic ice have chemical fingerprints, and we can work out when the planet started to warm, or when the poles started to warm up, and we can actually measure little bits of trapped air in that ice and measure the carbon dioxide content of it. And we find that as the planet starts to warm, and we've only seen this every 100,000 years, for going back 34 million years, should I say, every time the planet warms up, about 650 to 1600 years later, the carbon dioxide content increases. So in Monday's Mercury, there was a letter and a statement claiming that the composition of the atmosphere controls the temperature of the planet. It's the exact opposite. It's the temperature of the atmosphere that controls the amount of carbon dioxide.
It's about controlling the population above everything else. So let me ask you, how do you think they're going to monitor individual carbon output? Well, mass surveillance. So if you emit too much carbon in your daily life, you're going to be restricted from every aspect of society basically, from purchasing certain foods or travel, all restricted. Cities are being designed in a way that facial recognition will connect to your digital ID and track everywhere you go. Some people liken that to a smartphone, saying they already know everything about you, so in a jaded way, they believe it doesn't matter. But that's the point. It's even worse than our current situation with big tech. And that's because every action you take is put into a social credit score, all attached to your identity, and directly connected to the government. But there's more, because it's connected directly to your finances. So it's going to be incredibly easy to debank people for spreading quote-unquote disinformation, just as an example. And if they get their way, you will not be able to escape it.
Imagine for a moment that you live your life in chains, except the difference is these chains are invisible. It's a world where every single daily choice you make is controlled by something you can't even see. A world where at any time your government could cut off your access to your own money just because you've driven a few too many miles. And a world where the poorest among us will be given more reasons to struggle, while those at the top continue to live life the way that they always have. The truth is, we could all be living in that world very soon. It's a world that is ruled above all by one thing: carbon. Okay, so how does programmable money tie in with the personal carbon limit? Well, it all comes down to whether or not you've gone over your monthly usage, and if you have, there are two possible case scenarios for that. The most openly talked about penalty for a person going over their individual carbon limit is that they'd simply get charged for doing so, just the same as what happens to large companies today. Taken too many car trips this month, or bought a little bit too much meat? In that case, you'd simply get a bill at the end of each month from your government so you can pay the price of being a naughty citizen. As your entire carbon usage would be tracked by a government CBDC, there would be no way to hide how much carbon you've used. And since they now also hold the keys to your money, they won't even need to send you a bill for your excess usage. Potentially, they'll just automatically pull your fine from your bank account. So now let's look at the second option of what could happen if you go over your monthly carbon limit. And potentially this could give your government more ways of controlling your life. And in order to do so, we just have to look at what's happening in China. As we already know, the Chinese government can already take away people's ability to buy certain items through a social credit system linked to their bank account, which is exactly what your government could do as well when a programmable CBDC inevitably comes into play in the West. And it's very possible they could use a CBDC to program your spending if you step outside the limits of your monthly carbon allowance. For example, have you refilled your card too many times already this month? You could find that next time your card simply doesn't work at the pump. Or did you recently fly to the other side of the world to visit your family? Well, until your monthly limit resets, it's possible that you may not be able to buy so-called high carbon food items like coffee, meat, chocolate, or potatoes. Again, this scenario is just theoretical at this point. However, with the power of CBDCs, it would be very easy for governments to control your money in this way and to literally be able to cut you off from buying certain things you want to buy because you've exceeded your monthly carbon limit. In short, this could really be the perfect tool in order to control the daily choices of a society, and it would be in the hands of the people at the top.
They openly talk about how they plan to control the population through these carbon emissions, and it all starts at these climate events. But again, it's even worse than that, because one of their doomsday pitches coincides with a much, much darker plan. In order to control people, they're pushing fear of disease, tying future pandemics to climate policies. It's the ultimate psyop. It's basically trauma-based mind control, merchandising the fear established during COVID as leverage for other insane policies. It's clever. It's evil, but clever. But to do that, they brought out the head of the WHO.
Climate change is the defining health challenge of our time. It affects every dimension of health. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the stability of health systems on which we rely.
The climate crisis is escalating the severity of extreme weather events, increasing food insecurity, exacerbating respiratory diseases, and fueling the spread of infectious diseases. Achieving the Paris Agreement target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is a public health imperative. WHO joins the report's call for transformative action to reduce air pollution and increase health equity. I look forward to COP28 in the United Arab Emirates next month, which for the first time will include a day dedicated to health. Together, we must continue to remind the world that the climate crisis is a health crisis.
Now this push to tie climate to pandemic responses is incredibly nefarious, as it ties into the biodefense bills at the DoD, and the plan to push the world into biometric surveillance, the Internet of Bodies. And that connects to the Internet of Things, which brings you to the Internet of Everything. It's one big technocratic scheme.
COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance.
They call it part of the fourth industrial revolution.
One of the features of this fourth industrial revolution is that it doesn't change what we are doing, but it changes us.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change. Up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion.
The focus, as all of you know, today is on what's now called the Internet of Bodies, involving medical implants and other kinds of devices that go inside your body and all together with the Internet as a whole comprise the Internet of Bodies.
The Internet of Bodies, or IOB, is actually an ecosystem. It's a bunch of devices that are connected to the Internet that contain software and that either collect personal health data about you or can alter the body's function. We think of the Internet of Bodies as this collection of all these devices as well as all the data that the devices are gathering about you. And in healthcare, Internet of Bodies has been around for quite a while.
All devices, including the ones embedded within your body, are tracked and stored by the government, knowing everything about you, down to the very cell. So yeah, I know that sounds pretty out there, but trust me, you can find all the clips for yourself. They openly talk about this stuff. So now, I'm going to save my hope for the end of the video, so you doomers don't have to worry just yet. But these establishment types are not taking the recent election news very well, at all. Determined to subjugate the entire world to their will, current Energy Secretary Granholm wanted to ensure the world that their plans will not be derailed.
The message is that regardless of who is actually occupying the White House, this transition is happening. It is happening in the United States at the subnational level and with the private sector and with NGOs. It is happening globally with countries that you all represent who are not turning back. The absence of leadership in the White House does not mean that this energy transition is stopped. In fact, I would say to countries who might see the U.S. stepping back from climate policy as a reason to step back themselves, I would say to the contrary, this is the time to accelerate, to fill that gap that may be left by leadership in the United States. But truly, this transition is happening and there's no turning back. Thanks, everybody.
And yeah, I'm pretty sure we are turning back. But I want to make one point very clear. It's not that the transition to clean energy is necessarily the problem. I do believe we're going to get there. But it's all about demanding a sensible transition to new alternatives and getting rid of all the authoritarian control. No one cares about new tech. New tech is good. But all the advances they push out have one underlying characteristic. They're planned to be used to micromanage your every move and deny you basic access to society. That is, if you go against their wishes. The thing people really have to understand is that there's punishment vectors embedded within all of it. It's all built on a punishment or compliance spectrum. And that right there, that's the damn problem. And so in that vein, it is my hope that the United States will pull out of these global agreements, such as the Paris Climate Accords. And Europe wanted to let everyone know that they're moving ahead with their Agenda 2030 plan with or without us. And I believe that's an interesting development, because we're basically creating a control group. As America is planning to go down another path, Europe will be following through with their plan for net zero emissions and economic degrowth. So, we'll see who fares better in the years to come. And I'm sorry to the base Europeans, but you're in for a hell of a ride. And I'm really not being hyperbolic when I say the new system is going to be a digital prison. They want to monitor every move, every purchase, watch everything you eat, and dictate what you can or cannot do, what you can or cannot say. It is terrible in every aspect. I really do hope you guys pull out of this, because it's going to get real bad. And yeah, that brings us to the war on food, a key component to the COP29 event. Control the food, control the people, right?
The World Bank published recently reports urging the high-income countries, but also the middle-income countries, to start policies on diet shifts away from meat and to tax meat and dairy. So the World Bank had this report published in May. It's called Recipe for a Livable Planet. So the world needs to transition away from animal protein overconsumption. So last year, the COP28 conference had an item on transitioning away from fossil fuels. But now the time is here that we also say we should transition away from animal protein overconsumption, and especially in those countries where this consumption is overconsumption. Rich countries should lead the way towards harmonized greenhouse gas emission pricing. Tax revenues can be used for climate finance, and there's a lot of action needed.
Yeah, they want to move the world away from animal protein, and they want to implement this in every Western nation first. But it's really about more than that, because it's not only about carbon pricing for food, for individual purchases. They want to punish the manufacturers.
When we eat meat and dairy, this is causing like 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So it's damaging a lot of things in the world. Climate change is caused for 20% by meat and dairy. So the producers of meat and dairy should pay for the damage they cause. That's normal. When I damage the window of my neighbor, I have to repair this damage. But meat and dairy processors also have to repair the damage they cause on others and in the future.
Make the polluter pay, they say. Yeah, that's both the companies and you on an individual level. You're not a citizen, you're a polluter, a danger to our world. And that language right there is intentional.
Our food systems are harming the health of people and planet. Food systems contribute to over 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and account for almost 1/3 of the global burden of disease. Transforming food systems is therefore essential by shifting towards healthier, diversified, and more plant-based diets.
Secondly, recent reports from the FAO and the World Bank has also called for GHG emission pricing and true pricing in our food systems. The potential revenue of emission pricing is, with this simple calculation, calculated as 168 billion USD per year. And even though this does not account for the price elasticity of demand, it is only a tax on meat, not other animal proteins. So the actual number is probably much higher.
Yeah, so they claim they can make $168 billion a year by taxing meat production and meat consumption. Which of course only affects the lower and middle class, because if you're rich, who cares if you pay a little bit more for food, right? They'll be eating steaks and you'll be eating bugs. Now, what was pretty funny about this is that they all spoke about getting rid of meat, and well, they all flocked to the meat buffet at COP29, and barely anybody went to the vegan section.
There is a line at COP29's food court for the buffet serving meat, another buffet serving meat, and here is the vegan-only restaurant. Doesn't quite look like the same amount of interest by the UN delegation here.
And I didn't see anybody eating bugs either. Weird how that works.
You start to see people like Bill Gates gobble up farmland, and you read what his foundation says about farming. When they say that we're going to have a particular type of agriculture, they want large blocks run by the government or by private consortia where they say we're not going to have animal-based proteins, we're not going to have stockyards, we're not going to have turkey farms, we're not going to have chicken. The academic mind always has the answers, but never in the real world. And they do a lot of damage.
Everywhere you look, small and medium-sized farms being gobbled up by these corporate mega farms because they can't keep up anymore. They can't comply with these endless streams of regulations that are coming down. We're seeing that in China now, where these giant mechanized corporate big government controlled mega farms are displacing all these little small family farms that families have been farming for hundreds of years, in some cases longer. They're moving them all off their little plots of land and moving them into these big horrific mega cities that they have built. And we're going to see that all over the world with the decimation of small farms. So if they're not bankrupted by economic forces, the government itself will shut them down.
Everything is falling apart. There is a shortage of food. Many people do not have enough money to eat every day.
Everybody's out here today because they understand that when our government actually expropriates our farmers, you know, we're all next.
Not just Holland is now facing these types of regulations, but you can see the attack on farmers all over the world. It's an agenda that is carried out on a global level, that is being pushed through government officials in respective countries.
This is precisely how
the globalists have managed to take over national parliaments and national governments.
20 countries equal 80% of all the emissions. You solve the problem to start with by making sure all of those 20 countries are doing what they need to do. We have to pull them to the table and leverage further. So how do we get there? Well, the lesson I've learned in the last year is money, 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 money.
They're following a script where they are thinking already from the perspective of a global, bureaucratic, quasi-totalitarian system of governing, system of rules. This is an agenda, and all these countries are implementing the same policies. So they've targeted the farmers because that's the agenda.
Right now, things have tripled as far as costs for my own farming operation and for many farmers across the country. And I think you're going to see across the board higher food prices.
Food prices are already up dramatically this year, last year a little bit too, and we might see more empty shelves in America. Even the president is promising food shortages in his conversations, so there's no need for this to be happening. You know, the people are the ones that are going to be hurt. You know, not just farmers, you know, trying to make a living. It's going to be the food supply of this country, which is a staple of our security of our nation, being able to grow the grain and the crops that we do, that not only supplies us, but our allies and other trading partners around the world.
We have 8 billion people on the planet now, and that's sustainable if they allow agriculture to continue to be mechanized and genetically altered. And I don't think they understand that if they tamper with that, you're going to have people go hungry.
We are headed into, I think, a time of very significant food shortages. Can we expect to see massive increases in food prices next year? Oh, no question about it. So I think the end goal of the war on farmers that we're seeing, which is guided at every step by the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030, is going to be a total consolidation of agriculture, a total consolidation of the food supply, and as every communist tyrant of the last 100 years has understood, if you control the food, you control the people. I think that's ultimately the end goal.
But man, oh man, the people in the UK are getting it from all sides. Have you heard about this new inheritance tax on family farms? Well, they accused farmers of hoarding land and wealth, which is verifiably insane. And the audacity of the UK elite and the political class accusing anybody else of hoarding wealth and land is equally absurd. You know, farmers don't really just hoard land. They feed the nation and manage ecosystems. The only thing this tax is going to do is force families to sell their land. And you want to know what happens after farmers are forced to sell that land to cover the tax? Well, it's going to be sold off to corporations. And here's the kicker. Corporations are exempt from the inheritance tax. So it's all a plan.
In favour of doing to farmers want to go on the streets, we can do to them what Margaret Thatcher did to the miners.
So just to be clear, John, you would, beat them up?
No, close them. I mean, this is an industry we could do without.
So, okay, all right, so this got weird. So you would do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, she used very heavy-handed police tactics, followed by what? Putting them out of business.
If people are so upset that they want to go on the streets and spray slurry on them, then we don't need the small farmers.
Right. Okay, John, I'm not sure that's a particular... You were, just to clarify, you were a former Labour Special Advisor, possibly emphasis on the word former there, but just to go on...
Farming is an industry we can do without. Have you ever heard a more ridiculous take than that? You'd be hard-pressed to find one. So, with all of that coming out of the UK, I found it hilarious to read this article right here. As Trump looms large, can Starmer save the world? Man, if you're looking to this bougie fool to save you, then you are truly effed, man. You know, it's crazy. The UK is doing all the terrible things that Stalin did, and they're bringing it back for version 2.0. But let's assume for a moment that they're correct about this perceived climate emergency. Well, their priorities are all effed up. And so, since we're talking about the UK, we'll use them as an example. But look at this chart. While they're trying to get you to give up basic human rights and eat bugs, look at what the real problem is. Yeah, it's Asia, who are exempt from the climate goals. That's because it's not about the climate, it's about control. If they were really worried about this, they would address the glaringly disproportionate levels here, but they don't, because it's bullshit. But yeah, anyway, here's some hopium for you. I really do believe that Trump's gonna pull out of these global agreements. And it appears as if everyone on the global stage is anticipating the same exact thing. They simply cannot hide their fear about it either. You can tell they're kind of afraid and desperate. And for that, we go to this clip right here of John Kerry.
I just want to bring up climate as well. This is the man who pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement. How do you see efforts to fight the climate crisis in the next year? Do you see a dialing back? I mean, are you concerned?
Well, a lot of that depends, let me just say, to some degree, that depends on what President Trump were to decide to do. If he pulls out of the Paris Agreement, he would diminish the ability of the world to be able to respond to this existential crisis. Now, I know people get a little wiggly and, they can't listen to you when you say, oh, this is a really serious issue. I'm trying to figure out why human beings are so wired that they don't want to take an existential challenge at face value. But the new science on what is happening to this planet is frightening. And it's not politics that's producing that information. It's not ideology. It's not some pet project of President Biden or John Kerry. It's the result of what scientists are telling us. And mathematics, physics are documenting what is happening to this planet. We are burning fossil fuel without capturing the emissions.
He actually wonders why we're wired to push back against this. Well, number one, it's a part of human nature to defy tyranny. It's deeply ingrained in us. And on top of that, if you just have a couple neurons firing, you can pretty easily tell they're lying. The restrictions they want to place on everyone are immense. When you combine all of their initiatives, you're basically a political prisoner. And the global media are not too pleased either.
Okay, let's talk about something that was, until recently, perhaps recent years rather than recent months, was seen as the key global issue that many world leaders would worry about, talk about, but perhaps not in recent months. We're talking about Baku, Azerbaijan. It is the setting for the Global Summit on Climate Talks, world leaders meeting to work out how to rein in rising global temperatures. What are the hopes for a meeting when we know the incoming president of the world's richest economy, Donald Trump, is a known climate skeptic? His recent speech back in just a couple of weeks ago, Madison Square Garden in New York, talking about the Green Deal scam of Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, investment of hundreds of billions into the green tech economy, and also saying many times his catchphrase, drill, baby, drill. We're talking about one of the world's, if not the world's biggest oil producer at the moment, with the biggest greenhouse gas emitter and the most powerful economy. Let's have a listen to President-elect Trump. This was just a couple of weeks ago in New York.
We're going to drill a baby drill. And I will terminate the Green New Scam, and we'll cut your energy prices in half, 50%, within 1 year from January 20th. Is the fake news hearing that? Whoa!
Is the fake news hearing that?
Well, things are not going so well. People in Europe, for instance, Europe was a leading continent on fighting climate change, but now all these economic reports on Europe falling behind China and United States. We have too much regulations. You have the Draghi report, which says perhaps you should lighten these regulations. And so there is a moment of backtracking a little, of doubt. Are we going too far on one side? Not enough economic strength. So yes, the moment is a bit difficult today. I am very concerned by the fact that the United States is rushing backwards, back to oil and to gas and even to coal.
But if John Kerry or the Mockingbird media didn't get the message across to you, well, they gave some similar talking points to John Podesta as well.
For those of us dedicated to climate action, last week's outcome in the United States is obviously bitterly disappointing. It is clear that the next administration will try to take a U-turn and reverse much of this progress. And I know that this disappointment is more difficult to tolerate as the dangers we face grow ever more catastrophic. But that is the reality. In January, we're going to inaugurate a president whose relationship to climate change is captured by the words hoax and fossil fuels. He's vowed to dismantle our environmental safeguards and once again withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement. That is what he has said, and we should believe him. None of this is a hoax. It is real. It's a matter of life and death.
It's not a hoax, he says. Interestingly, climate scientists have just issued a shock declaration that the climate emergency is over. This happened at a climate conference in Prague, which took place on November 12th. The communiqué, drafted by eminent scientists and researchers who spoke at the conference, makes it clear that for several decades, climate scientists have systematically exaggerated the influence of CO2 on global temperature. And yeah, we know.
The climate right now is no warmer than it's been many times throughout history. Our baseline is now the lowest that carbon dioxide has been in 600 million years. As far as temperature change, the IPCC's first report of 1992 showed that the medieval warm period was warmer than the present. Well, this didn't fit the narrative, so by the time the 1996 report came out, it was a completely contrived graph called the hockey stick. So what they did was they got rid of the medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age, and so instead of the graph doing this, they flattened it out, and then they added instrumental record on the end that looks like it's going way up. The point is that the people that are calling them out on it are not getting the media coverage. Because look, at this point there's billions of dollars going into the whole climate change narrative.
But a large part of the COP29 event that I didn't really touch on was the push for censorship. Yeah, climate disinformation.
Our times are tumultuous, and we need to race much faster to tackle fundamental common challenges. The climate crisis has burned through another record, with 2024 likely to be the hottest year in history. We see the impacts everywhere, and our inability to tackle these challenges and more is eroding people's faith in governments and institutions. The threats we face today are interconnected and international. But global problem-solving institutions desperately need an upgrade. We must also fight the coordinated disinformation campaigns impeding global progress on climate change, ranging from outright denial to greenwashing to harassment of climate scientists.
Ironically, no one spreads more disinformation than the UN itself, who has said in the past that we only had until the year 2000 to reverse course or we're all dead. And yeah, it's the same talking point decade after decade. It's interesting, isn't it? They really stake everything on people having amnesia. They won't remember that we've been lying about this for years, right? Yeah, we do remember, and there's a thing called the internet. But this trend goes back to the 1970s. They were telling everyone back then that we only had a couple years left too. It's the same tired propaganda over and over. Now I'd like to show you another one detailing how the war on carbon might lead to catastrophe.
We're in a bit of a carbon dioxide famine now. If you look over geological history, it's been much higher than now most of the time. Most plants do better with more carbon dioxide than they have now. So it's just a complete distortion of the truth to call it a pollutant. It's not a pollutant at all.
When did this start becoming a pollutant and not just the naturally occurring material that we all heard about growing up?
It got latched on by green politicians. Al Gore is a person who comes to mind, but there are many others. And so people saw a way to make a buck in demonizing CO2, and that's what's happened.
So your presentation goes into the science. What are some of the things that people should know that would help them realize that this myth of carbon pollution is in fact a myth?
Well, one obvious thing is that greenhouse operators, who grow, tomatoes, flowers, intentionally increase the CO2 concentration in the greenhouse by factors 2, 3, 4. And you have to pay to do that. You have to pay for the CO2. But it's still worth doing it because the plants grow so much better with more CO2.
What is it that the climate catastrophists are getting wrong about CO2?
More CO2 is good for the world. It's not bad for the world. And so it's absurd to be trying to reduce CO2 with all the other problems, with the absurd projections of lower costs for renewable energy. That's clearly a lie. It's not true.
And explain to us how is, in your opinion, as a Princeton professor and climate scientist and physicist, how is CO2 good for the world?
Well, for the first thing, if you look at geological history, and you've got lots of good geologists here in Australia who've made this point many times, we're in a CO2 famine now compared to what is normal for plants. And just about any plant, if you give it more CO2, and a lot more, it will do better. In my country, most greenhouses double or triple the amount of CO2, and they have to pay for it. It's not cheap. But it's worth investing in it because the plants grow so much better. The quality of the flowers and the fruits are so much better. And the situation is even better outside of greenhouses because in addition to the benefits you get in a greenhouse where you have plenty of water, you get resistance to drought. And that's particularly important in Australia, which has large areas that are quite arid. And if you look from satellites, Australia is a poster boy of greening of the entire world, especially Western Australia. So it's unbelievable that they've managed to turn this beneficial gas, a part of life, into a threat. You know, they talk about carbon pollution. I can't imagine what they're talking about. We're made of carbon. Right? And we breathe out 2 pounds of CO2 a day, each of us, right? 8 billion people, 2 pounds a day. Multiply that by the number of days in the year. And in fact, many of them say, well, people are the real problem. It's not the CO2. We've got too many people. And really, we can't have more than 1 billion people in the world. So I look around in a room, they're not even the 7 out of 8 of us here on this show enough to reduce the population. First of all, as I'm a physicist, I probably know as much as any climate scientist about how greenhouse gases work. And basic physics says there's no climate crisis. The only clear effect you can already see from more CO2 has been a greening of the Earth. This is very dramatic, and there was a study released just last year showing that about 45% of the increase in wheat yields have been due to CO2. Of course, other things contribute, fertilizer, better varieties, but if you really want to bring CO2 back down, it means that you also bring down food production in Earth, and that's certainly not going to be good.
Yeah, and if you take a look at this chart, it seems to be right. What's crazy is the fact that if they succeed in their war on carbon, stripping it from the atmosphere, resulting in collapsing ecosystems and plant life dying, guess what they'll do? Well, they're going to blame climate change. They're creating a situation that's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their policies lead to collapse and environmental decay. And then they're going to use that to convince people that their policies are needed more than ever. It's diabolical. Now, I want to show you a short film about what it's going to be like to live in this new world. I'm pretty sure it's a teaser for an upcoming documentary called 2035.
New regulations increase funding for public awareness. All cars will be required to have advanced climate control systems.
Thank you. How did we get here?
Good morning, California. We are experiencing another wave of brownouts as concerns grow over China's new coal power plant. Citizens are urged to do their part and remember our responsibility to Earth.
At first, I wanted to do what I could. Be a team player. Okay, you've got 2 minutes of hot water. Think you can be quick? Ready, set, go! They told us it wouldn't last long, and that we were in this together.
Dad?
Yeah?
Do you think we'll be able to fly out to Grandma's for Christmas this year?
Yeah, maybe. But probably just have to FaceTime her.
Okay.
There are still echoes of the world I remember, but they feel distant, like memories from another life.
Mr. Williams, in preparation for your meeting with the chairman this evening, I think it would be wise to set a good example. We wouldn't want to miss hitting our ESG score before your big evening now, would we?
They say, in order to serve the greater good, we need to make more sacrifices.
Okay. Let me just say a few words, if I may. We need to say thank you to Chadwick for almost securing something.
Of course, David, I hear great things about you. I'm sure they're just words. They don't mean anything. I'm kidding, of course.
And Jessica, thank you. Pearl,
But when I look around, the we that does the sacrificing isn't them. It's us.
Dinner was nice. If we cut back on emissions, maybe we could do something like that for your birthday? Thank you.
Yeah. Sure you're okay biking home?
Oh yeah, my score's gone way up since I stopped driving.
Updated federal mandates are going to be published later this month, and employers are scrambling to keep up. So later tonight, we'll discuss those new
I live in a world that is constantly giving me feedback.
especially your home AC usage, as fears of brownouts are still.
And I want to leave it better for him. But most days, I'm just left wondering, how did we get here?
Power allowance depleted.
How did we get here? Well, that's why I make these videos, to show you how we got here. And it all starts at these climate events. The thing to keep in mind is that this agenda is merely totalitarianism disguised and cloaked in virtue. That's all.
This is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world. It is the inventory and control plan. Inventory and control of all land, all water, all minerals, all plants, all animals, all construction, all means of production, all food, all energy, all information, and all human beings in the world. And this is a plan that was agreed to by 179 nations back in 1992. It's a United Nations plan. It's called the Agenda for the 21st Century. And so many of us around the world think that, well, sustainable development, it just sounds so great. Isn't it about recycling and creative reuse and creating energy and food resources for everyone? And the answer is no, it really is not. It's about moving populations into city centers, concentrated city centers, and clearing them out of the rural areas. All systems have to be brought into harmony in order to control them all. Because when systems don't meet, when they're out of balance or not in sync with one another, they can't be controlled centrally. And the goal of Agenda 21 is one world government and total control from a central unit. Every nation that signed on to Agenda 21 has its local Agenda 21 plan. People in the United States are completely unaware of this. If I go out and talk about this, the United States press attacks me and calls me, which is totally ridiculous. It is a, but it's not a theory. It's a fact. The three pillars of United Nations Agenda 21 are economy, ecology, and equity, the three E's. And everyone sort of thinks that they know what that means, the idea of social equity. It must mean that, well, everyone's going to have access to clean water and clean air, and no one's property is going to be used as a dumping ground because they are at a poverty level. But really what social equity is about impoverishing huge portions of the population and bringing down the developed nations. Everything that we're looking at now is destined to collapse our economies. It's a totalitarian state being developed right now all over the world. And what major corporations want in this development is to be able to have full movement of workers without borders or boundaries, to be able to move their goods through without regulations, and to reduce wages. And so this is the goal. So this is what you find with social equity. And of course, economy and ecology is about, these are the three circles: economy, ecology, and social equity. And where they meet in the center is balance. But really that balance is a communitarian balance. So it's not balance of well-being of the people. What it is it's a balance for corporations so that they can exploit and control and have populations in an area, in tightly packed, dense areas, so that they can be surveilled and managed. And this is what that balance looks like as far as the development of a totalitarian state is. The mainstream media is owned by 5 major corporations, and you're not going to get this information from the mainstream press. So you need to be your own press. You need to educate yourself. You need to get out there and educate your neighbors, your community, your real community. You need to help your children understand that they're being indoctrinated from pre-kindergarten to postgraduate school. All of us have a responsibility to ourselves and to others. This is true community, to work for personal freedom. And always remember that even though we work as a group, if we do work as a group, we're all individuals in those groups, and we answer only to ourselves. And this is essential. It's essential as free human beings. This is what we are. We are free, and we need to continue to be free. And I do believe that we will win, but we have to become aware that there is a fight, and then make our friends and our neighbors and our community aware as well, and work together.
Alright, that's all I have for you. I hope you have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll be back right after that. Enjoy yourselves. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals, or you could use PayPal. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.